Okay, we've been discussing the role of government and trying to describe a little bit what it was like being in biblical Israel and what kind of a government we had over there. And we discussed really the three parts of the government, the three legs of the Sanhedrin, which are the judicial system, the high priest, which ran the temple service, and of course the king, which ran all matters within Israel itself. After Solomon passed away, the country basically was divided into two, which lasted for a number of years until the Assyrians came in and actually exiled and destroyed the Jewish kingdom. They were exiled to Babylon for 70 years, brought back by some of the great leaders, Ezra and Nehemiah, and reestablished a second commonwealth within Israel. This time, they didn't really establish a king. There was no king anymore. They figured, you know, let's do without a king. But the Sanhedrin was established. They did have a Sanhedrin. And they were basically run by the Sanhedrin and the high priests and kind of what they called the Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of the Great Assembly, which was just an expanded version of the Sanhedrin. It was a body of rabbis who basically ran the show. There wasn't really much taxation going on because no one had any money, so it was useless of trying to get any money out of the people. They were basically at the behest of their rich brothers and sisters, either pouring money from Babylon or whatever they can eke out within Israel. What happened later on is, as there was a fellow that we talked about previously called Alexander, and Alexander the Great came in and kind of overran Israel, and for a number of years his successors ran Israel until the Maccabees, who we know the Maccabees, Judah Maccabee, came and overthrew the Antiochus and the Greek kingdom and pushed them out of Israel and reestablished. The only reason why I bring up the Maccabees is just for one interesting point. When the Maccabees took over, now they were running the show. The Maccabees themselves were Kohanim, from the family of the high priest. And they established Shimon, one of the brothers, Simon, as the high priest. And as they began to think about, okay, how are we going to run this country? Who's going to run it? Then they thought about, in the olden days, we used to have a king. Well, why don't we bring back the kingdom? It ran pretty good. You know, especially now, we're very popular, the Hashmonaim, where the people are behind us. And Simon said, great idea. Let's establish a king. And who better than I? Well, so they said, you're the man, you're gonna be the king. So now, where God had intended the kingship and the priesthood to be separate, the Maccabees fused the two offices together. And Simon became both the king and the high priest. The Sanhedrin didn't say anything, because the Maccabees were extremely popular. You can imagine, this is a family that led the rebellion against everybody, so the Sanhedrin didn't say anything. But I believe, and I'm not so sure this is 100% true, but I believe that one of the reasons that we don't have a big book of the Maccabees, do you ever know the story of the Maccabees? We don't know much about the Maccabees, do we? Only what we know about the Maccabees is from where? You know where? From the Apocrypha. Only from the books, not in the Tanakh. It's not in Tanakh in the story. And if you look throughout the entire Talmud, you know how long the story of Hanukkah is? 8 lines, 10 lines, maybe. The whole story of the big celebration of Hanukkah that we have today, this major holiday in America, is maybe 10 lines long. And I believe one of the reasons they did that is to kind of punish the Maccabees and the Hashmonaim for doing this, for taking the kingship and the priesthood. They said, okay, you know what? To the victors, write history. So later on, when the Talmud was written, and they sat down, they said, okay, Esther, we love Esther. We're going to give her a whole book in the Tanakh, plus Megillah, they gave her a whole book in the Talmud. A whole book in the Talmud is dedicated only to reading the Megillah. Reading the Megillah. Hanukkah, which is 8 days long, they give them 20 lines in the Talmud. Have a good day. See you later, pal. I mean, so you know what? Never fight with a Sanhedrin, because ultimately your family is going to go down and they're going to be around. And for 2,000 years, but no, nonetheless, I don't want to say this was exactly the reason for it, but I think one of the reasons they were very unhappy, the rabbis, that he took upon himself. Now what happened was, years later, after Simon died and his family continued, one son and another son, and eventually 2 brothers fight together. the Jews pulled off one of the biggest faux pas ever in the history of the world. And they didn't learn from this faux pas. And what was that? While two of the brothers were fighting for the kingdom, two of the Hashmonaim sons, Aristobulus and John Hyrcanus, were fighting over the leadership. One of them decided, you know what, it's a good idea. There's this big country called Rome. Why don't I say to Rome, hey, listen, come here, I'm going to make a deal with you. Why don't you come with me and we'll take over the government of Israel, and then I'll be the governor and then you could go home. So the Romans said, tremendous, great idea. So they joined with one of the brothers. They took over Israel. They booted out the other brother. And guess what? The Romans never left. You know what? They didn't live up to that part of the deal. You know what? Oh, invite a foreign government in and expect them to leave. It doesn't work that way. And when the Romans came in, they stayed. And in the year 70, after much turmoil and a lot of revolution and bloodshed and turmoil, Israel was finally destroyed as a people altogether. Nation was exiled. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and for the next 2,000 years, we were never going to see another Jewish homeland. So as far as government was, we're out of government now. We're like the internal opposition. You're never making it to the government. We're like, some party which never makes it, like in Canada, it's called the NDP, the New Democratic Party. They're always running, they're running, but they never make it. They'll get 2 seats, 1 seat, 4 seats, but they're never really a factor, but they're around. So now the Jews are living now in a foreign country. What do we do here? We, a people who have God as our leader, God as our government, God as our ultimate authority, all of a sudden now we're living in these countries where you have kings and you have caliphs and you have other kind of rulers. What do you do? So one of the rules that we came up with in the Talmud says, Dina de Malchusa Dina. The law of the land is law. That's it. You live in Babylon, you live in Egypt, you live in Syria, you live in Iraq, you live in the United States. Anywhere you live, the law of the king is law. Meaning, the words Dina de Malchusa Dina literally mean the law of the king is law. Because again, when we're talking about when these rules were made up, it was only kings were in those days. Whatever the king says, that's the rule. What does that mean? That means that if the king says, you need to pay taxes, a Jew needs to write the check. That's it. There's nothing to talk about. You write the check, you have to send it to the king. If the king says, Perelmuter, I want you now to go and possess Paul's house, it is not thievery. I'm allowed to go it. I'm allowed to go into Paul's house and take over his house. It's not a problem. Why? And there were several reasons given for that. One, the Jews considered themselves aliens to the king and are only living there in this country at his behest. And since they were there at his behest, they were kind of quote-unquote slaves to the king. Not in the physical sense as slaves, but in the sense of, we're here, and in a moment the king could turn around and boot us out, so therefore we accept his rule as law. So therefore, since your house is anyways really the king's possession, and he says to you to leave and I take it, I'm not a thief. Means I don't have to go back and if the king says to me, Perelmuter, I want you to be a tax collector, even though it's not the most popular job, I have to go around and I have to collect taxes. And if the king says, 1 out of every 10 sheep belongs to me, I shouldn't be too smart, but give the king 1 out of every 10 sheep and give it to the king. Why? Because the Jews took upon themselves this idea that we are foreigners in a foreign country. We don't belong here. This is not where we are. Eventually, we hope and pray that Mashiach comes soon. And that beat in the heart of every single Jew. When that happens, we'll go back to living a normal life. But as long as we are living in a subconscious state or in an ill state, where we're sick, we have the flu, it's not normal, we have to follow the laws of the country. Excuse me. Sorry. Now, this was true only to the point of where the laws of the government did not conflict with the Torah laws. If it conflicted with the Torah laws, a Jew had the responsibility of standing up and saying, I can't do it. So if God says, take I take that back. If the king says take Paul's house, it's no problem. Why? Because Paul's house belongs to the king. But if I have to go now to the courts of the Gentiles, so if I'm going to a Babylonian court, and the Babylonian court is completely different than a Jewish court, for example, I'll give you an example. In a Jewish court, a relative cannot be a witness. Okay? So if I have a dispute with Mark, and he brings in his brother as a witness, it's no good. Because his brother's always, of course, going to testify for him. I think, no? Bro, yeah, I know how close you two are. So his brother's always going to testify for Mark. So I have a chance to win. So in a Jewish court, you can't have a relative be a witness. And that's true even for signing of the ketubah or whatever it is. A relative has to be outside of anything that has to do with witnesses, testimony. In a Gentile court, who has these rules? If I come to court and I sue Mark can't bring his brother as a defense. Of course he can. So in this kind of cases, a Jew did not have the responsibility of following along the court. Why? Because in that case, the rabbis felt that if we're going to allow the court system to overtake our own customs and history, we're finished. We're doomed. Everything within Judaism is going to fall apart. So we need to hold tight to what we have and believe in the Torah. As long as the laws of the land do not conflict, we follow along. If they conflict, we don't. So let's take the United States, for example. We'll fast forward here to America. Okay? The government says pay taxes. We don't like to. Oh, we'll try everything we can not to pay the taxes. We have to pay the taxes. Okay? The government says I'm using these taxes to build nuclear weapons. Oh, I hate nuclear weapons. Too bad. You've come to this country, according to Dina de Malchus Dina, you've come to this country as a foreigner, and when you came through Ellis Island and you took a vow to become an American citizen, or you were born in this country, you swore to uphold the Constitution and to defend this country to the best of your ability. Okay? So, you give your taxes, and the government, who you elected, does whatever it wants. So if they're going to build nuclear bombs with it, or some people don't like the fact that they give food stamps. I hate, I have to give food stamps. Come on. Those people can't go to work. It's not your business. And the fact that they're $400 billion in a deficit, that's the way it goes. You have to pay your taxes. That's the way it is. Okay? So as far as dealing with the government, you have to follow the rules and the regulations. What about the court system? Because that's already a little bit different than following the government. So if me and Mark, let's say, have a dispute, okay? Whatever happened, I bumped into his car or whatever it is, and we have a shtickl machlaikis. We have something going on. Mark wants to take me to court. Absolutely not. The rabbis forbid going to secular court. If two Jews have a dispute, they must go to a Jewish court. Why? Because based upon these rules and regulations, if we went to a secular court, what would happen? The secular courts in America would say, well, Mark, bring all of your witnesses. Mark would bring his brother, his wife, his son, his daughter, and they would all say Perelmuter's a no-goodnik. And then, and I have to bring my wife and my children to say Mark is a no-goodnik. And then we get, who's the bigger no-goodnik? And then the court would settle it. So the rabbi said, absolutely not. So if two Jews have a dispute among themselves, they must go to a rabbinical court called a Beth Din. Absolutely, this is one of the most fundamental principles within Judaism today. There's absolutely no right for anybody to go outside. What happens if I have a dealing with a Gentile, just a regular, not a Jewish person? Then of course I have to go to a secular court, and no Gentile is going to agree to go to a rabbinical court. What, are you crazy or something? So you have to go to a secular court. What happens if the Beth Din could not adjudicate? Let's say, okay, we come to Mark, and basically, how does it work, a Bezdin? Bezdin works that Mark picks a rabbi, I pick a rabbi, these two rabbis get together and pick a third rabbi. This is the court. We come there, we give our cases. The court says, Mark, you're right. I'm very angry, of course. He's right. I thought that I was 100% right, and I happen to be the rabbi of this congregation, and they vote against me, so I'm not paying. That's it, I'm not paying. So the court the Beis Din sends me one notice, pay. They send me another notice, pay. The third notice, they say, if you don't pay, we're giving Mark the right to go to secular court. Now, that's really a little bit different. Because if Mark goes to secular court, then he's gonna bring in his paper with the Bezdin's agreement, and he's gonna show the judge we already went and he adjudicated it, and Perelmuter's a scuffle, he doesn't want to pay. Now I got a problem, because what the secular court can do is they have authority behind it. See, the Bezdin has no authority. I could go like this to the rabbis, da 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 da, if I wanted to. What are they going to do to me? There's nothing they can do. But if he goes to secular court, they're going to send the marshals. They're going to garnish the wages, take my car, take my house, take my kids, take my wife, whatever they do, they're going to get their money. So therefore, Judaism was very clear that when we live in a society that is not run by Jews and is not governed by the Torah, we have to follow the rules of the society. We have to. That's the way it is, because we are foreigners living in a foreign country. And that's the way Jews always felt to them about themselves. Now, Jews living under Muslim rule, because later on, about 6 or 7 centuries after the destruction of the temple, the Muslims grew very quickly, and a number of Jews ended up living under Muslim rule. It was very interesting. For the most part, I'm not saying this was exclusively true, but for the most part, Jews fared a lot better under the Muslims than under the Christians, generally speaking. There were, of course, times when there was fundamentalist, crazy Muslims that, that attacked the Jews. That is true. But generally speaking, why? There's a number of reasons, but I think one of them was the Muslims always allowed for a second-class citizen, a dhimmi it was called, and the Jew was always considered a dhimmi, a second-class citizen, meaning they could never become authority. A Jew could never become prime minister. A Jew could never become a caliph. A Jew could never become someone sitting in the Supreme Court. A Jew always knew that he had second-class status. So if you knew second-class status, the Muslims felt, you know what, if a guy wants to really go up, what's he going to do? Convert. So that's a good way of converting. Get Jews to, they want to convert. So therefore, Jews and Muslims got along. The Muslims had a kind of a kind of a Torah called the Quran. They followed a set of rules. Jews followed a set of rules. The Muslims didn't eat pork. Jews didn't eat pork. Muslims had multiple wives. Jews had multiple wives. And Muslims prayed several times a day. Jews prayed several. So there was a lot of commonality between Islam and Judaism. And therefore, I think the communities pretty much got along as long as the Jews did exactly what the Muslims wanted them to do, and they just behaved. Pay your taxes, pay to the caliph, whatever it is, and that's great. Under Christian rule, it was very different, because Christian rule many times were fanatical Roman Catholics, and when there were fanatical Roman Catholics, there's only one way to increase membership, and that was to convert them. So we know about the Spanish Inquisition, we know all about these things, and what the Christians did throughout Europe to the Jewish experience. So Jews had a much tougher time under Christian rule. What happened, and what did this develop? What developed in the mind of the Jewish people, and this is what's interesting when we come here to the American experience, is that Jews had a very bad taste for the word government. All right? Because what was the government? The government was only out there to get them. That was it. The government wasn't there to help them. If we had a problem, could we ask for reprieve from the government? Or if we had a situation with our neighbor, no, you couldn't go to the government, because the government was always against you. Not always. I'm sure there were governments within 600 or 700 years of European experience that were friendly to the Jews, but generally speaking, the governments of Europe were against the Jewish people. And what that did was it set in the mind that we have to do everything we can to stay out of the way of the government. So meaning, if the government asks for taxes, don't pay. If the government asks for recruits to the army, don't give. If the government says something, look the other way. Stay out of the way of the government. And anything you can do to circumvent the government, that's the way it is. And and in this mindset, too many people came to America with the same mindset. You see, in Russia, for example, what was a government? I mean, shmir mi ve'eshmar loch, right? What was it? Whatever you can grease someone's palm, that's what you were able to get. So people came from Europe here to America, and they thought it's the same way. And there's an interesting letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe to the Hasidim of Lubavitch in the early 50s, where he writes to them, my friends, America is very different than Russia. All this shtiklach, he says, all this stuff that you used to pull off in Russia, you know, with bribery and this and that, it doesn't work here in the United States. The United States is a very different experience. Here, you have to follow the rules. Because there, you wanted to get papers. How do you get a passport? You pay off. You wanted to get food? You pay off. Everything was pay off, pay off, pay off. So government and Jews, oh, it was the worst kind of thing. Forget about it. There was no greater enemy to the Jewish people than the government itself. And not only the government, but even a Jewish government. And what do I mean by a Jewish government? Because there was a period within Jewish history that was something called the Vad Arba Arotzis, the Council of the Four Lands, where there was a great population of Jews within Central Europe, which was made up of Poland and Russia and Greater Poland and Volyn. These four counties had about probably 1.5 million Jews, and the governments allowed the Jews to establish their own government called the Vad Arba Arotzis, the Council of the Four Lands, meaning they allowed them to do their own taxation, they allowed them to distribute the money, because don't forget, the number one power in any organization is the finance committee. They are the most powerful aspect of any government. Without money, who's the most powerful committee in Congress? Who's this? The Appropriations Committee. Because without the Appropriations Committee, you ain't getting one red cent. So if we don't appropriate, I mean, we have the greatest defense, but if all of a sudden the Appropriations Committee says, no, the Defense Department is getting $3 this year, we're out of luck. All the generals could go home and retire. That's the most important part of the government. So the secular government told the Jews during the 18th century, you govern yourselves. No army, obviously no army. The Jews were happy not to have an army. But everything else, they allowed the Jews to do. Meaning they could tax the people, they can establish their own little organizations. What happened was, and this is what's the killer. After 20, 30 years, it became totally corrupt. Because what happened was that if you want to become a rabbi in a certain city, only if you paid up could you become the rabbinate. Only if your father-in-law was a rich guy and he said, hey, you know what? I want Perelmuter to be the rabbi at Shul by the Shore. Perelmuter is the worst. He can't do anything. How about $100,000? Did you say Perelmuter? I thought you meant Perelstein. No, Perelmuter is great. Of course. We take him. We love him. No problem. And what happened was complete corruption ended up within the Vad Arba Arotzis. And within a matter of 50 to 60 years, the whole experiment went kaput. Because no one trusted them anymore. No one believed in them anymore. And if they said, we want to raise taxes, why should I give you taxes? Because all you're going to do is say, okay, I take the money. Now we have to split it up. So Charlotte, she wants money for the National Council of Jewish Women. Now we don't like that, that's too progressive. So we're not going to give any money to the National Council of Jewish Women, but we're going to give now, for example, to the Bnei Akiva. Yeah, we like that right-wing organization. So all the money gets funneled into the right-wing. What about the National Council? No, we're not going to give any money there. We don't like this organization. What about this? No. So people said, this is totally correct. You're only giving to the people you like. It's not really representative of the people. So Jews, let them govern for 20 years. It's a miracle that Israel still exists today. But we'll get to that in just a moment. We'll finish off with the state of Israel. Now, it's a miracle because this Vad, this council, didn't last very long and it just fell apart. People became completely disillusioned with Jewish self-government. They said, you know, we're better off with the Goyim. At least we don't have to pay the taxes with the Gentiles. With you, we have to give the taxes, so forget about it. That was kind of abolished. But what that did is at least it set in the minds of the people, maybe we should actually start thinking about our own government somewhere within our own country. And that started to get the Zionist idea going. And today, I'm not going to go, this is not a history of Zionism class, but you know, Jews went to Palestine, they established, they got going. 1948, there was a state of Israel that was founded. Okay. How did they find the government? What kind of government? They certainly did not use this as their blueprint. I can tell you that much. They certainly did not use the Torah as their blueprint, as their constitution. Why? Because what would we consider the father of the Zionist movement? Who?
Herzl.
That's right. Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was about as assimilated as a Jew as you could possibly get. I mean, when we talk about assimilation, and we talk about Theodor Herzl, his picture is under the word assimilation. He himself did not even circumcise his own sons. This is how far he went out. Why? Because to him, the Zionist idea of self-government was not a religious institution. Whereas I spoke about in the beginning that Judaism was based upon the precept that God governs the Jewish people. No. We're going to be like everybody else. A duly elected, democratic, socialist government. Not so much socialist, but pretty much socialist government. No? So what happened was that when the party started get going, what was the reaction of the Orthodox people to this? What would be your reaction if you were an Orthodox person to Herzl's claims?
Be against it.
What?
Be against it.
Totally against it. Be completely against it. Why? Because we only have one constitution. This is not, we're going to put together a constitution, we'll make Chetzkel the police minister, we'll make Moshe the finance minister, Yankel the prime minister, and we're going to have a good day. No, keep us. We're going to sell pork in Israel, have Jewish prostitutes on the street, all of these things. What are you, crazy or something? Be like every other country? But Herzl was adamant. Now, the way the world worked at that time, there was so much anti-Semitism that even the Orthodox said, you know what, maybe we're better off going to land of Israel, even with Herzl and his non-religious friends. And eventually that's what happened. And when the Zionist movement actually came into the first Congress, there were many Orthodox people that joined the Zionist movement, albeit a very small number. But a few brave souls ventured out and said, you know what, we'll attach ourselves to these guys because it's still better off being in Israel run by Moshe, Cheskel and Yankel than living in Europe under the Tsar, Hitler and Mussolini. I mean, pick your choice. So I think if given the choice of Hitler, Mussolini and Stalin versus Yankel, Cheskel and Shlomo, we're picking Cheskel, Yankel and Shlomo. Even though they don't put on tefillin, they don't wear a kippah, they don't keep kosher, and there's Jewish prostitutes in Tel Aviv. All right? So the Orthodox people began to but there were a number of Orthodox that said, not only is this wrong, but this is going to keep away the coming of Mashiach. Mashiach is not going to come because of the Zionist state. Ultimately, World War II happened, the state was enacted, the state was created, and the rules of the state of Israel are basically governed as a democratic country. Albeit, the Zionists had a little foresight, and they did include, because Israel is not the separation of church and state as we have here in the United States. Far from it. They have an establishment of a chief rabbi. So right away, again, obviously you see that as a connection between religion. So they made this kind of a pretzel twist into including religion, but not including religion. And that's why today we're still fighting in Israel, even after 55 years of who are we? I mean, do we keep Shabbos? Well, we don't, but no buses run. Okay, that makes sense. Do we keep kosher? No, but, but Yom Kippur, your clothes are. It's kind of a, trial and error going on there in Israel. And if it wasn't for the Arabs around us, I think that we would probably destroy ourselves from within, because we would kill ourselves. This guy would say, no, we should sell pig. No, we can't sell pig. But it's a democratic country. But it's not a democratic. What's the bottom line? The bottom line is that for Jews itself, the way that God had intended for us to be governed, and the role of government in our lives, is one thing called the Torah. The Torah needs to be our guide to the way we live. And the Torah allows for the Jewish hope and development of nature. Meaning that, we have a society, you could build, you can own, you can govern, but within limitations. That means, for example, if you own a home, someone sells you a home, and they did it out of desperation, you have to allow the person to rebuy the home if they should want to. The Torah says that clearly. If he doesn't want to, that's fine. He'll just give it to you and forget about it. But if he sold it out of desperation, this home was there for ages, and so you have to give him a chance to rebuy it. If you don't want to, don't buy it from him if you don't want to resell it. So the Torah understands the whole idea of human dignity. A slave has to be released. All of these things, debts have to be released at a certain time. All of these things have to be taken into account in a capitalistic society. So generally, the Torah views us, the Jewish people, living in a most healthy society as not having a king, but only having the Rabbi Shalom, only having God rule over us that only works if we ourselves acquiesce. That means we need to accept that that's the true facts. Once that we don't accept it, we can't accept the Torah as our constitution, and we can't accept that there's a Sanhedrin that's going to adjudicate and live with us and live with a high priest in a temple, then it all falls apart. And that's really the history of the Jewish people. Therefore, we find ourselves living among Gentiles in a very unpleasant world many times, and have to take upon ourselves dina de malchus dina. The law of the land is law. Why? Because we feel ourselves as second-class citizens, and therefore whatever the king says has to go, otherwise we're going to be kicked out. But we hope and pray that one day God will have mercy upon our souls, and we ourselves will see that our true existence is only tied up into the Torah and into the laws governed by the Torah, and He will send Mashiach to reestablish the true state of Israel in Yerushalayim, together with Mashiach. L'chaim. Questions, please. I'm alive. Paul, what is with these people? Bob.
The prohibition against lending money, how do we get around it?
That's a very good thing. Very, very good question. Because in all reality, it is a rule that very much cripples business. Because how could you do business without lending money on interest? Who's going to give out money and not be able to make money? So the rabbis were very creative, and they wrote what was called a heter iska. If we look clearly at the Torah, it says that the prohibition of lending money on interest is only between an individual and an individual. So if I lend you money, Bob, there is no way that I could, take interest from you, because prohibited. But if all of a sudden I give my money to Bank Leumi, to an Israeli bank, and they lend you money, that's no problem. They can charge interest because they're not an individual. And if you accept the interest, you pay the interest. So what we write, if I borrow money against you, whatever it is, we write what is called a heter iska. We create a third entity, which is a business, and you are borrowing money from the business. In reality, it's not really done if me and you are doing it individually. There's no way I could get around that. And if I lend you money, there's no way I could take interest from you. I mean, I'm doing it, it's a favor, and that's the way it is. But let's say we want to do business together, and I want to buy a house, and I'm going to pay you 12% interest on your money. How can I do that? How can I pay interest on your money that you lent me money? I can't pay you interest. That's when a heter iska comes into play. Meaning we create a third entity, we funnel the money into the entity, and the entity pays you interest. Not I pay you interest, because otherwise I would be prohibited. Now, let's say you come to me and you say, no, Rabbi, I want to pay you interest. I know that you're going to take your money. I cannot take interest from you as an individual, from an individual. There's no way I could take interest. Not only can I not take interest from you, you can't even say thank you to me for taking the loan, because the mere fact that you said thank you gives me a kind of a pleasure. That itself is interest already. So therefore, if it's loan between individuals, but with institutions in business, it's permitted, because that's the only way. We know that's the only way that business can be done.
So maybe I'm very naive, but really, among Orthodox Jews, if somebody asks you for a loan and you want to give him the loan, you don't take interest?
Exactly. You can't have interest on the loan. You can't have interest. Now a guy will say, you know what, I'm losing the money, but that's part of doing it. That's part of doing business. Now, you have to. I'm not so sure about this, but you have to check this out. If you actually wanted to draw a legal document, there's somewhere, because I remember running into this a couple of years ago, this issue that if I'm lending you money, you come to me, I'll lend you $10,000, and I want it back, and I want you to write, Mrs. Kern is going to pay me back. I think that you have to include an interest, something in there, because legally it doesn't make sense or something like that. Might be something, a legal document that we'd have to sign. But I'm not exactly sure. I'm running into this problem, but generally speaking, there's a prohibition of not taking interest. That is clearly from the Torah, several times from the Torah, that you can't take interest from another Jew.
In modern Israel, the right to return, how did, for Jews to come back to Israel, how did that get written into the, was that from the United Nations? Or?
Oh no, that's a purely political internal thing, the right of return. Israel was established on the premise that this is the Jewish homeland, that the Zionists always said, and their dream was that Jews would come from all over the world to settle in Israel. So that's what they wrote. The law of return is strictly a political. No, the nations of the world would like to see the opposite. The nations of the world wrote the white paper stopping the Jews from going to Israel. Now it was a completely internal, political statement from the Zionists saying that every Jew has a complete right to go back to Israel.
So if I have a house,
yeah.
I'm a Jew, I have a house, and I rent it to another tenant who happens to be a Jew. And then he doesn't want to leave, and we have problems, and then we go to court. We really should go to the Jewish Beit Din?
Oh yeah, of course. You have to go first to the Jewish Beit Din. But, since many people here in America, the only time we can accept this is if both people accept the rule of the Beit Din. If I have a completely secular, assimilated Jewish neighbor, and he won't even abide by the Beit Din, what I would do is, I would go to the Beit Din, I say, listen, I have a problem with Mr. X. Mr. X is not a religious person, but I would like you to send him what we call hazmanah, an invitation to come to Beit Din. They would send him a hazmanah. He would most probably refuse it. Who's this? Who's this guy from LA sending me an invitation? He throws it once, he throws it out twice. Third time, the Beit Din then gives me a clearance. Once I already made the steps, at least first trying with the Beit Din, then I could go to secular court. But I can't go to secular court without first going to the Beit Din. Because what happens then, if you circumvent the Beit Din, everything falls apart. All of our rules fall apart. Everything that we have built up, all of our rules and regulations, because American law is not equal to Jewish law. We think, American law based upon common law, but it's not the same. It's not the same as there's rules in testimony and witnesses and in damages and how to pay that are very different between one and the other. So therefore you have to first go. And secondly, what you're saying is that our courts are no good. The Beit Din is nothing, and American courts are good. I mean, that doesn't play well, within Judaism. So you have to go first to a Beit Din and try.
And every city has Beit Din?
Pretty much. Every big city. I mean, LA, LA, Denver, Chicago, places like that.
The religious parties in Israel participate in the government as a minority, and I suppose that's just a compromise to do the best they can as a minority. If the religious parties were to ever be a majority, is it reasonable to assume that they would disband the secular courts in Israel?
Oh, that's a very good question. In order for that to happen, you would have to say that a majority of the people living in Israel are obviously religious, which is not the case right now.
Yeah, but what if?
They would then have to amend the whole constitution, basically. Meaning they'd have to say, just like Israel has, just like United States, in order to amend the constitution, you have to have 2/3 vote or whatever it is. The same thing is true in Israel. So even if the religious parties had 51% of the vote and 61 members of Knesset, doesn't automatically mean that they could overturn everything within Israel itself. They'd have to go through a procedure. I'm not sure of their legal procedure as like with a constitution. You have to have 2/3 of the states and of the legislatures, and you have to have the Congress, and you have to have this. I mean, they have to go through a procedure, but I don't think, in our lifetime, I doubt that we would ever see something like that. I mean, even though that the religious parties, not the religious parties, but the religious population in Israel is growing, and the secular is kind of shrinking, but still, I don't think even the religious themselves would want to live in a religious society. Because if we lived in a religious society based upon the precepts of the Torah, for example, if you ate chazer, they'd whip you. Now, I'm not even sure a religious person would want to live like that. Not today. So even if they said, you know what, I want to live in a country, but I don't want to have this Sanhedrin, flogging me, in the marketplace if I didn't give enough charity. I don't think the Jewish people would want to live this way. This works Now, a Beis Din works well if everybody understands, and the basic underlying theme is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, is God-fearing. If you're not ready to accept that and live life the way the Torah demands you to do, it's a harsh government. I mean, because the Sanhedrin will send out messengers and will, poke into your business, because your business is our business, right? Because the welfare of the country is only good if everybody follows the rules. So if I'm out there, partying at night, what's happening is there's a virus growing inside the country, and the Sanhedrin has the responsibility of uprooting that virus, of getting rid of the virus. So I'm not sure in today's day and age with our sensibilities, how many people, even religious ones, would want to go back to a theocracy from the Torah. Like a rebellious son. Anybody here have a teenage son? Okay? Anybody here have a teenage son who's not rebellious? Who's not rebellious? Not rebellious. See, everybody here didn't know. Okay, so what do we say about a rebellious son? If you look at Deuteronomy, you have to take him out and stone him. Right? Now, who here wants to stone their rebellious son? Nobody. Oh, all right. No. Sometimes. Yeah, okay? I don't think we'd want to do that. I don't think we'd want to do that. I don't think we'd want to go that if you want to have a shrimp cocktail, they flog you at the marketplace. It's just most people are not comfortable with in our sensibilities. I don't think it's, in Israel we have an issue of going back to Torah law. It only works if, imagine we talk about a rebellious son. What it takes for parents to stand there while they're stoning their son. It's to me unfair. Can anybody imagine that? I know we all want to say I'd like to kill them every once in a while. Now everybody knows the feeling of that, and but actually taking them out and stoning them, it's impossible. The only way you could even remotely begin to appreciate this is if you understand and believe 100% that you're doing good. By stoning him, you're actually saving him. Now, to me, I don't know, I'd rather jump in there myself into the pit than rather stone him. But if you actually believe that, and in a Torah theology, in this kind of a society, you would say yes, we're saving society from him. Okay, you would do that. So to live with this constitution is not so easy. And Hashem knew this. But this is, if we wanted to live the way God intended us to be governed, this is the way it would be. Thank God a story like the rebellious son didn't happen even in a time when we had a constitution in Israel based upon the Torah. They never stoned the rebellious son. It tells us in the Talmud this case never happened because there was so many particulars that had to fall into place. It was almost an impossibility. But even the possibility, or even the beautiful woman. Now that's a kind of a thing that I could, if you go to war, let's say the Israeli army, goes to war and they attack Syria. They end up in Damascus and they see this beautiful Arab woman. You could marry her. It's not bad, huh? It's not a bad way to go. Now, in Israel, modern day Israel law, you couldn't just pick her up and marry her, but according to the constitution of the Torah, you could marry her. You're a victorious army, you go in, you see this beautiful Arab woman, you take her back to Tel Aviv on your shoulders and have a good day.
But she's not Jewish.
That's a very interesting point. So the Torah says you could let her live with you for 30 days. Either she converts or she has to go home. But the mere fact that you're allowed to steal a woman from Syria and take her back to Israel with you is also very uncommon kind of a thing in American sensibilities. Could you imagine if the soldiers today in Iraq, the American government says, well, guys, you did a good job. Go for it. Have your go at it. And they run around, hey, let's go. Who wants to live in Tupelo, Mississippi? Okay, you're coming with me. Today, CNN would be on that story faster than who knows what. You would think about, wait, you're nuts or something. Or now we have female soldiers. You say, come on, go get yourself a nice Iraqi guy, to take back with you. So the sensibilities today would go, my God, you guys are crazy or something? You take an Iraqi woman and put her over your shoulder and carry her on the plane as you're heading home and you come off the plane, Andrews Air Force Base with an Iraqi woman. Forget about it. What?
Only if she's a rebel.
Only, yeah. So some of the rules in here to our day modern sensibilities are kind of foreign. But in the olden days, if we understood it in the context of the time that it was written, it makes sense. It makes sense at that time. So
I have kind of a way out question.
go ahead.
What do you think the take is that, a lot of people said that we're nowhere near ready to have a woman president, but we have now a woman Secretary of State, which is a pretty important job.
Right.
And intermingles with other governments. What do you think their take is on that we have, on dealing?
Well, she's not the first she's not the first woman Secretary of State.
Right.
Yeah, she's man. She's those numbers. But I think that, well, first of all, we're not the most progressive of this, because in Europe you had heads of state already that were women. You had Margaret Thatcher, and Golda Meir was a head of state already in Israel. So I think we're less progressive than most countries in this. And I think we're about ready to have a woman president. If not 8 years, 12 years, somewhere within our lifetime, we'll definitely see a woman president. And why not? Why can't a woman be you have women who are chief executives of Fortune 500 companies. She can run a company with a $400 billion deficit. I can do that. Who can run you have to be such a chacham to run a company with $400 billion deficit. Okay, but I think the governments of the world, well, generally are broken. Europe could care less. I mean, what's interesting about her that she's African American. I mean, I think that is more than Madeleine Albright, because Madeleine Albright was already from European stock, and she's
Jewish.
What?
Jewish.
She was kind of Jewish, right? She was Jewish at least.
She was really Jewish.
I know, but
I know, but
what is she today? Catholic? She could Episcopalian, something like that. All right, but but the point is, I mean, but here you have an African American woman up there. I'm sure to a lot of governments, because I'm thinking about the fact that she goes to Iraq, and Iraq, did you see the voting going on in Iraq? All the women all came with the same. It's amazing how they all went to the same sale. They all had the same outfit on. I mean, it must have been Macy's day sale. So to them, this must be mind-boggling. I mean, to the Arabs, because they won't even let women out in public. And now you have an African-American woman, which is by far, so to them it must be like, there's something wrong with this, but that's what we hate about the United States, because we hate the fact that women can achieve, no matter what happens, the highest level. But you know what, you got to deal with it. And that's what it is. So in Saudi Arabia, when she goes to Saudi Arabia, where women can't drive, they can't go out without their husbands, they can't do this, they can't do that, and all of a sudden she walks in there,
Without the veil?
without the veil, and she walks in like that. I would do something as short, she doesn't wear a long dress. She could do something with her hairstyle. If I would be her advisor, there's something with that hair. I don't know what it is, but the hair scares me. But the thing is, to them it freaks them out. It must freak them out. But the sad point, to them, it's, it's like dealing with the devil. That's it. It's like dealing with the devil. But to the Europeans and everybody else in the world, look at Ukraine just now has a woman prime minister. They just appointed a woman prime minister in the Ukraine. So it's to the Europeans and everybody else, it's nothing. To these Muslim countries, it's still shocking, but you got to deal with them, because we are the United States and we're a big oil consumer. Just like we. What is our sensibilities dealing with these guys? When we go to Saudi Arabia and we think to ourselves, look who we're doing business with. We who stand for equality and democracy and everything good about human beings. Look what's going on. It's no secret what's going on in Saudi Arabia, a despotic theocracy like that, and we're dealing with them. So that's the way it is in the world. You gotta, and when you go to the Far East, they don't care at all. Because women there have always been much more independent. I think even in China, women don't even take their husbands' names. And you talk about Madame Chiang Kai-shek and all of these other women who were very powerful people in Southeast Asia. So there I don't think it's a big issue. It's just in these countries where they look at women as second-class citizens that's to them it's a problem. But She's something else. I'll tell you something else. I mean, whether you like her or you don't like her, she's something else, this Condoleezza Rice. You know, I mean, whatever.
You see the,
she's actually a brilliant pianist.
Yeah, I mean, she's yeah. Her parents really raised somebody, you know. Well, now, I'm not talking about her politics. You may agree with her politics, not agree with her politics, but this is a lady that has, you know, produced, you know, in life. I mean, she's come up, and you know, I mean, it's. I think she's a role model. Whether you again take out her politics, but she's definitely a role model for people who say that minorities can achieve in this country. I don't think she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth.
But her cousin, Condi Rice, is
Yeah.
also she works for the poor. She's been on TV several times talking about her work with the people.
But you know what? But no one knows about her cousin. That's the problem.
Oh, she's been interviewed. She's eloquent.
No, I'm sure she is, but
She said, Connolly in Washington, she says she takes $1 million and over. She said, I take the people under and
all right.
take care of them.
It's a trickle-down theory.
is there any progressive movement in Israel, like there's a lot of controversy, a lot of dislike, like the divorce law they have, because that's a talk.
Right. Yeah.
Religious days instead of sectarian. Is there a movement, a noticeable one?
There is a movement in Israel now. Just to back up on Paul's question, we were talking about before. Excuse me. We talked before about Israel and how Israel did pretzel and and leapfrogs and somersaults to try to come up with a solution of how to appease the religious and appease the non-religious. So Israel, when it was established, said that all civil services are going to be in the hands of the religious rabbis. For example, marriages, divorces, circumcisions are all given in the hands of the rabbis. So now, if you want a divorce in Israel, you need a get. You can't just get a divorce in a civil court, you need a get. So you have to get a get. You got to get a get. That's it. You got to get a get. So Paul's asking, is there a progressive movement within Israel? Yes, there is. There is a progressive movement within Israel, albeit it's a very interesting thing. They have tried to establish for many years a reform and a conservative base within Israel. Conservative meaning Masorati, they call it traditional. Reform. Interestingly to me, I don't think they've had much success. And I think the reason why is like this. Israelis, unlike Americans, fall into two categories. E, they're religious, so who needs conservative and reform? Or B, they're by design not religious. Meaning, they go to school, they learn the Bible no matter what. They learn about the holidays whether you like it or not. If you're in Israel, you're going to know about Yom Kippur. You could be the most. I remember Mrs. Kern's husband telling me, I think that when he was a kid, they used to drive to Jaffa. Am I making?
Not only a kid.
Yeah, I mean, so they used to drive on Yom Kippur to Jaffa to have a meal on Yom Kippur because they was on Pesach to have the bread. They used to drive to the Arab section. So by osmosis, you're already going to know about the holidays. You're going to know this, and you've rejected it. You're not interested. For whatever reason, whether because your neighbor was a rotten husband and you rejected religion. So reform is not going to come in and tell you, well, you know what, if you don't do if you try to massage it this way, it's going to be easier. For whom? Easier for what? Now, if I go to shul and we sit separate, that's the way it is in the world. Women sit here, men sit there, that's the way it goes. So I think Israelis, unlike Americans who are not rejecting religion out of whether it's spite or just not interested, because we don't know reform plays well in this country. In Israel, it hasn't until now. It hasn't until now. Either we're secular or we're religious. That's it. Two, either I go to shul or I don't go to shul. And if I have to go to shul, I'll go already to this shul. Already like this. And as the more orthodox are increasing in Israel, the pressures on reform and conservative become stronger and stronger. Now, one of the complaints and the reform movement is that in Israel they get a very tough time. Why? Because since in every town, according to the rules and regulations, there's a chief rabbi. Who's a chief rabbi in every town? Orthodox. So when the money gets funneled into a town like Rehovot, where does it get disseminated to? Well, it goes to the mikveh, and it goes to the yeshiva, and it goes to the day school. And what about the Reform Temple? And it goes to the yeshiva, and it goes to the day school. So, that's the kind of, because, who needs these guys here? Competition. So we're going to try to do whatever we can to block them from coming here. So that's the issue that's going on now in Israel. And the Orthodox are increasing, and because of the way the government is formed, which is also not normal, because every party with 3 members holds you by, the balance. The Orthodox have a lot of power way beyond their numbers, because look at Sharon right now. Sharon has now a government that includes Labor and the Orthodox parties, which is what? Labor, which is the extreme left, and the Orthodox party is so Israel is a crazy country in a sense of its political makeup. And that's why I would never be Israeli prime minister, even if they called me up tonight and said, Rabbi, we've elected you as the prime minister of Israel. I'm not accepting, I'll tell you this right now, because there's no worse job in the world than that. Because not only are you fighting a war from a foreign powers, and everybody in the world pretty much hates you, your own party hates you. Because if you don't, and that's the problem with progressive movement in Israel. So what many people decide to do is get married outside of Israel. So they do. They go to Cyprus or they go somewhere else and do that. But in Israel itself, it's going to be a long time till you break the Orthodox rabbis' stronghold on religious affairs, because they're not giving it up. And when it's money, even more so. So all funerals, all weddings, all where that's where the money is made. The rabbis know money are made into 3 gimels. There's 3 gimels is where you make your money. What are the 3 gimels? Gittin, Geirus. How does kashrus get into it? There's got to be another gimel there. And something that, there's 3 to 3. What is it? It's divorces, Gittin, conversions, and kashrus, and kosher supervision. So this is where the money is made. So you're not going to give this up, right? So therefore, it's hard to break a stronghold like this, and especially the way the government is created. It's hard to foresee any in the future.
Would you like to see it broken?
Me, no. Being an Orthodox rabbi, of course not. I like to see, obviously. What I like to see is civility. I don't like to see a Reformed temple being burned down by some right-wing crazies and saying, we don't need you here, and you're heretics, and you're goyim, and you're destroying the land of Israel. This I hate to see, and I don't like to see Reform rabbis being and conservative rabbis, being taunted or disrespected in Israel. I believe in pluralism. So if there's a people who want a conservative congregation, this is not. We're not living in the Torah times. If this is what they want, this is a secular country built by secular people. Let them have it. But the fact that Israel is the Orthodox have a stronghold, to me personally, is good. As an Orthodox rabbi, I like it because it keeps some sort of standards in. So that if a convert comes out of Israel, that it's according to the Rabbanut, it's according to the Orthodoxy. So there's no question who converted you. Was it this rabbi? Was it this rabbi? Was it this guy? Did the guy have a beard? Did the guy have an earring? Did the guy have a nose ring? Did he? So therefore, for me it's good. Of course, if I was of a different stream in Judaism, I would speak differently. But I'm.
So what do you think about the Torah Karta who are against the government?
No, Torah Karta, I completely disaffiliate. They're not. I don't even believe they're religious Jews. To me, this is not religious Jews. To me, these are frauds wearing a beard and long black coats. Because anybody that can join up with the enemies of Israel and salute an enemy of Israel is an enemy of Israel. And to me, this is their enemies. They're enemies. Now, again, to the point where you got to be careful, because you say an enemy, you can incite, religious riots to kill in the Torah Karta. I don't want to see them killed. I just hope that they repent. That's what I say. They should repent. The Torah Karta is this group of fanatical religious people that are very anti-Zionist, that when Arafat was in the hospital in Paris, they went to visit him in a vigil, and they placed flowers there at his bedside, and they went there and visited him while he was in Ramallah. These are people that are against and pray for the destruction of the state of Israel. To me, these are not, they're Jews, but very bad Jews.
Also, one of their
What?
one of their main men was originally from Beverly Hills.
Ooh.
With the with this group that feels that the Messiah hasn't come yet, so they're working with the Arabs.
Listen, there's a lot of crazy people.
Hirsch, I think, was his name.
Yeah, Hirsch. He's from Beverly Hills. Now, Hirsch is still around. He's still running around, Hirsch.
In Beverly Hills.
Is what?
He's still got relatives in Beverly Hills today.
I'm sure they're very proud of him. Yeah. What? This is the Natura Carta. We've talked about them before.
Well, they're embarrassing to my Judaism.
Of course, absolutely. But you know what? I'm not embarrassed because you can never judge our religion based upon its adherence.
Unfortunately, the greater population sometimes judges.
Yeah, but you know what? I'll tell you honestly, you know, for the people that are our enemies are always going to judge us no matter what. It's like judging Mormonism on the fact that there's one guy living in southern Utah that has 27 wives, 95 children, and his oldest is his wife of 12 years old. You can't judge Mormonism based upon that guy.
Well, as an intelligent person, I look beyond that. But the majority of the world is not so well educated, so intelligent. They say, oh, those Jews, look at them.
Yeah, but you know what? It's true. I agree with you, Charlotte. But you have to be ready for anything, because that's the way the world is. There's always going to be within a society crazies, and that's just like fundamentalist Christians who are against abortions are not going to rally around, I hope not, against a guy that's going to kill abortion doctors. Now you're going to say, is everybody who's against abortion a guy who's going to kill abortion doctors? No, but that's what everybody's. Oh, look at this! It's horrible. That's the way the world is. And I'll tell you, if you're pro-choice, automatically you say, look, see, they're all crazy like this guy. They're all mad like this guy. If you happen to be a conservative, every liberal is like Ted Kennedy. A womanizer, a this, a that, a guy who killed a lady and the things. Every liberal is like that.
Cambridge was a womanizer too.
Who?
A lot of them are womanizers from both sides.
Yes, no, it couldn't be. From the conservative side, nah. It's impossible. Dick Cheney, never.